Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea. What if our whole understanding of disability is, well, kind of wrong? We're going to explore how just one shift in how we think about this can help build way stronger, more collaborative relationships with families. So let's get into it.
All right, let's kick things off with a big question, one that might challenge what you've always just assumed to be true. Is disability a simple biological fact, something that's just part of a person? Or is it actually a social idea, something our society has created and defined over time? This question right here is at the heart of everything we're talking about today. To even start answering that, we need to be on the same page about a key term, social construct. Basically, it's an idea that isn't a law of nature, but something that we as a society have collectively created and agreed upon. You hear this a lot when people talk about race, right? Well, the source material we're looking at today argues we should be applying this exact same lens to disability. And that brings us to our first major point. You know, we tend to think of disability as being purely biological, but a lot of the time it's actually society's rules, not biology alone, that decide who gets labeled as disabled.
Okay, let's make this real. Think about eyesight for a second. Where exactly is the line between having poor eyesight and being legally blind? That line isn't some fact of nature. Nope, it's a boundary that society drew, based on a whole bunch of agreements and rules. It's an imaginary line.
Now check out this real-world example. It's pretty wild. Before 1973, if your IQ score was 85 or lower, you could be diagnosed with an intellectual disability. But then, in 73, the official cutoff was changed, lowered to 70. And just like that, overnight, thousands of people with IQs between 71 and 85 were suddenly no longer considered to have that disability. Nothing about them changed, just the rule. A simple rule change completely redefined reality for a huge group of people. So if society is the one defining disability, what does that actually mean for people? Well, this social idea, it isn't neutral. Not at all. It creates some very real and very serious disparities. Let's take a look at the data. One of the key issues here is something called overrepresentation. In our schools, it means that students of color are diagnosed with disabilities at much, much higher rate than their white classmates. And researchers will tell you this is due to a whole mix of things, from individual biases to biases that are literally baked right into the tests and tools we use. And when you look at the numbers, they're pretty shocking. Data from the U.S. Department of Education shows that American Indian or Alaskan Native students are more than 4 times as likely to be identified with a developmental delay compared to white students. 4 times. I mean, let that sink in for a second. That is a massive disparity. And it's not an isolated thing. The same data shows that Black or African American students are over 3 times as likely to be labeled with an intellectual disability. This isn't just a coincidence, it's a clear systemic pattern. So this brings us to the core conflict. How does this happen? Well, it turns out there are 2 completely different ways of thinking about disability, 2 competing models that basically create 2 different worlds. And this quote from researchers Baglieri and Lalvani just hits the nail on the head. The whole disagreement, the entire divide, it all comes down to one simple but incredibly powerful idea. What do we consider to be normal? Okay, so it's really important to get these 2 models straight. On one side, you've got the medical model, and this is the one that's dominant here in the US. It basically sees disability as a problem inside a person that needs to be treated or fixed. But then you have the social model, and it says, hang on, the impairment might be in the person, but the disability is created by society, by things like inaccessible buildings, rigid systems, and biased attitudes. The problem isn't the person, it's the barriers we've put up. And because that medical model is the one we default to, it ends up creating all these real-world barriers that get in the way of working together effectively, especially between professionals and the families they're supposed to be serving. So, what do these barriers actually look like in real life? Well, for families, it can mean trying to find your way through these incredibly complicated systems. It means having to show up for critical meetings that are only held during rigid 9-to-5 work hours. And it means being handed stacks of paper full of professional jargon that's almost impossible to understand unless you have a specialized degree. And get this, even the tests we use can be a barrier. A lot of standardized tests are built on this idea of the bell curve. But as researchers point out, this whole concept of normal has a pretty dark history of being used to push a white middle-class standard and to justify the marginalization of other groups. The bias is literally built right into the way we measure things. Even the words we use can be a point of friction. For a really long time, what's called person-first language, like saying a person with a disability, was considered the most respectful way to talk. But now, many people in the disability community actually prefer identity-first language, like saying disabled person, because they see disability as a core part of who they are. The best thing to do? Just ask someone what they prefer and respect their choice. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so we've laid out a lot of the challenges. Now what? How do we actually move forward? Let's switch gears and talk about solutions, real, actionable steps we can take to build those bridges and create truly equitable partnerships with families.
So, here are 5 best practices pulled right from the source. Number 1, treat parents as co-equals. Value their unique expertise. 2, prioritize their involvement in everything. 3, use plain, everyday language. Ditch the jargon. 4, provide good translation when it's needed. And 5, be flexible with scheduling. These aren't just nice-to-haves, they are absolutely essential for real collaboration.
And really, at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. When we can finally see disability as a social construct and start to challenge the old systems that were built on an outdated model, we open up space for something totally new, a genuine, authentic partnership with every single family. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. What could our schools, our communities, our entire society look like if we started every single conversation by valuing every family as an essential, knowledgeable, and equal partner from day one? Just imagine what we could build together. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.